Today is Friday, July 5th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Yesterday, on the 4th of July, I posted an article on the Academy blog at classicalliberalarts.com. You'll see it listed under the latest posts on the right side of the page, and if you're listening to this further off in the future, you can find it on the Academy website. A post titled "The Corruption of Education and Its Reform." And I don't usually share these sorts of posts on the website, but this is an example of the way that I normally work through problems that I'd like to solve or answer questions that I'm currently wrestling with. What I'll do is I'll just take out a notebook or my tablet, and I'll just start making a list of thoughts on the question or on the problem, on the topic, and I'll just sort of let these thoughts out, just getting things out of my head onto the paper or onto the screen, as it were, and just continuing to think through these things as I write them and just move from one point to the next point to the next point. And as I do that, usually other ideas start to pop up and enter into this consideration, and sometimes I discover some helpful things, and that's usually how I settle problems. Really, anytime also I'm anxious or confused about something, I'll just start making lists of thoughts and just sort of get all the stuff out of my head where I can see it on a piece of paper and continue thinking about it in something of a progressive way. And I've been working on this topic for the past few days because it's been a topic that's been troubling me, I can say. This topic of the corruption of education. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit. Like I said, there's a post where I've listed, I think it's like 36 points, 36 ideas that I've been thinking about, but I'd like to speak a little more freely on the subject and share it with you. I know that among those who listen to the talks that I post, some are school administrators, some are college professors, and I'd like to share these thoughts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as I share my own. Because I think we've got a really complicated problem that we're afraid to dig into. And I'd like to try to get beyond the surface where we're just, or another illustration I like to use is just moving furniture around in the room rather than rebuilding an entire house. Because I think when it comes to modern education, we're stuck with a house that doesn't work for us anymore. And we're constantly trying to remodel it, redecorate it, move furniture around, and figure out different ways to use the space, and it just never works. And there's something fundamentally wrong, and we can go on and on and on investing money into this big money pit of a house. But eventually we come to a point where we say, maybe this house just is no good, and we need to build a new house. And I'd like to talk about education with this illustration of a house and ask you to think about it with me, because I think that we're continuing to try and make the best of this system as if it's impossible to change, when it is in fact possible to change. It's actually quite simple to change, especially today. But we would have to know how to change it, or for what purpose it should be changed. Not just have change for the sake of change, which is just annoying. So I'd like to talk about what I mean when I say education is corrupted today and it needs to be reformed. The house needs to be rebuilt. If I were to ask you, what is the end of education? When you take a 7-year-old student and get him ready for his first day of school, what's the end goal? What's the target that we're aiming at in education? What are we trying to accomplish? Most parents have no answer for that question. Most teachers, most school administrators have no answer for that question. They may have some cliche type sayings, like I remember one school I worked with, the motto was like, to raise future leaders who influence the world for Christ. All this great sounding but really empty talk about the goal of education. If we try to get to something substantial, though, we find that not many people think about education in terms of its end. And when they do, they just share these trite little things like we're raising saints, which is really foolishness. So when I think about education, the first thing I do is think about what education is not for. Schooling, and I'm talking really about formal schooling. Schooling is not for learning, because we can learn without school. We're learning all the time. If we read a book, we watch a show, we go and do something, learn how to do something, gain experience. We're learning things all the time. And it has nothing to do with formal schooling. We don't need to go to school to learn, especially today. The goal of schooling can't be learning. We can learn without school. For some, schooling is seen as a way to socialize children, to basically buy them friends in private schooling, to control by choosing a school and paying a private school tuition, to control the pool of possible friends our children might develop relationships with. But school is not for socializing. We can socialize without schools, and there are much better places for socializing. In fact, teachers are spending most of their time trying to get kids to not socialize while they're at school. So schooling is not for socializing. And when I really try to nail down what schooling, formal schooling, is for, I come up with something like this. The goal of schooling is to provide third-party assessment and recognition of a student's learning. So the students learn, students study, students work, and the real purpose of the school, and I ask you to think about this with me. Don't judge too quickly, but really ask, what is the purpose of the school? It's to assess the student's learning and to give recognition of that learning. And there's a number of ways we do this: report cards, grades, awards, diplomas, degrees, and so on. We go to school to be tested and to be recognized for our achievements. That's really what the school is for. It's a third-party institution that recognizes our achievement academically. And there's a good in that. It's good because if we read Proverbs chapter 27, verse 2, and I know the verse because I looked it up. Proverbs 27, verse 2, it says, do not praise yourself. I'm paraphrasing. It's not in my head right now, but it says, do not praise yourself, but let another man's lips praise thee. So the idea of going to a school, submitting to assessment, and then being recognized by someone else is actually virtuous, because that person's testimony of our learning is more important than our own testimony of our learning. So it's good to go, sit before a teacher, be assessed, and then have my learning recognized by someone else. Let another man's lips praise you and not your own lips. That's the words of the proverb. So there's something good in this idea of schooling, providing a source of assessment and recognition for academic achievement. And I always tell my students, just study and study and study, and the paperwork will take care of itself. Just study, keep studying. If you study, which is the real work of education, the paperwork will take care of itself. So that seems to be the real purpose of schooling, to assess and recognize student learning. And so when we think about that, we have to ask, okay, so what kind of learning are we seeking to gather, to collect? What kind of learning do we need? What kind of learning are we assessing? What kind of learning are we recognizing? And is the learning that we're assessing and recognizing the right learning? Is it actually beneficial for us, or is it just useless trivia? That's a question that I don't think we've thought about very much, and I'd like to think about it. Is the knowledge that we're actually collecting, assessing, recognizing, actually the knowledge that we should be collecting, assessing, and recognizing? And the only way that we can know the answer to that question is to answer a prior question, which is, what are we planning to do that we're preparing for in education? What are we planning to do? What is the destination that we're traveling toward through education? Where are we trying to go? And this leads us to the question of vocations. We're preparing by means of education for future vocations. And when we talk about vocation, the word means invitation or calling. And we can talk about vocations in a general sense, where we're called to some good work, generally speaking. We're called to earn a living for ourselves. We're called to have an honest means of living and so on. We have a general calling, but we also discern over time a specific calling. We can say that there's something unique that God intends for us to do, and if we're thinking rightly and seeking God's wisdom in our life, we'll be led to that vocation, and we'll be most happy in this life and in the world to come when we find that vocation. And it's not some mystery. It's not some sort of journey to discover our destiny or anything like that. It's simply an attempt that God puts within our power to know what He intends for us to do. And it's discerned by our own interests and abilities. So it's not some mystery. It's not some quest that we have to go on. It's usually pretty simple. Sin endangers our discovery of it, but if we're living well, we usually run into it. Our life works like a funnel, and we just sort of get there. But these vocations ultimately determine whether the education we're pursuing is good or not, whether the knowledge we're collecting is useful, whether the assessments we're giving are helpful or effective, whether the recognition is meaningful. And yet, if we were to ask school administrators, college professors, parents, teachers, even students, what are these vocations? What knowledge and skill is needed? And whether or not that knowledge and skill is being collected, assessed, and recognized, we wouldn't get very good answers. And this is the problem with modern education. And I would say even further than that, knowing that we don't have the answers, going on with what we're doing, just continuing to do the same things, is a corruption of education, because the whole point of education is that it should be an activity of rational human beings. And when we're not thinking about the ends, when we're not thinking about or evaluating the means, education is no longer an activity of rational creatures. It's just a habit, almost like an instinct. It's like animals being raised on a farm. When farmers used to train draft horses for plowing and farm activities, when the horses were young, they would simply tie them to a mature horse. And the younger horse would just follow the mature horse around, doing whatever the mature horse was trained to do. And we're living like those horses in training. We're not thinking about what we're doing. We're not thinking about what we should be doing. We're just sort of walking in the same paths that those who have gone before us have walked in. And occasionally we pretend like we're trying to do something better or different, but it's just the same thing. And this is the corruption of education. It's no longer an intelligent, rational activity. It's just an instinctive, imitative habit. Now, the reason why I say this is because so many things in the world have changed, even over the last 30 years. Since I was in college, I just saw a notice on social media popped up and said, 30 years ago today, Jeff Bezos started Amazon. It was 1994. 1994 was when the internet was developing. I was in college, so I remember it really clearly. I remember each new development was just, exciting. I remember the first time we started using email and how cool it was. And then when the first digital libraries were available and you could actually access thousands and thousands of texts, historical texts, from a computer. It was awesome. And it was like every couple of months there was some new breakthrough, some new development, some new resource. And so much has changed, even between 1994 and 2024. And yet so much of what we do is the same. Now, we may use different tools. We may have Chromebooks and we may use PowerPoint slides. We may be showing videos and working online and using Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas to manage online course materials and assessments. But the activities we're doing, the subjects we're studying, what we're talking about, what the kids are learning, what the assessments are assessing, what's being recognized is largely the same. It looks the same. It can be shown to be the same. And yet the world has changed so much. The vocations, the jobs, the way that schooling works, the way that all vocations work has changed so much. And education has not changed to match and serve those changes. And this is what I call, again, the corruption of education, because we're not thinking, we're not taking responsibility for the education of our students. We're just doing the same stuff for our own benefit, for our own paycheck, for our own salary, just our own convenience, we're not really thinking, is what we're doing actually good for our students? We're not educating them. We're just working in education. Now, an example of what I'm talking about can be seen in our recent accreditation. When I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and proposed my desire to go and teach the Classical 7 Liberal Arts, it was criticized. In fact, one major Catholic publisher entertained the idea a bit of working with me and sort of going in on the Classical Liberal Arts Academy as a project together. But their conclusion was that my plans were not realistic. The phrase they used was a paradigm shift, and that it was only good for those interested in religious vocations. And I said, no, that's really not true. It's not exclusively for religious vocations. But they just couldn't comprehend what I was seeking to do, or how valuable the 7 liberal arts and classical philosophy and scholastic theology are, even in modern society. And so they chose not to partner, and I went on and built the whole thing by myself. And last month, we were accredited by the world's largest accreditation agency. And the reason why that's significant is because what the modern accreditation agency is seeking is not what most people say or think the modern accreditation agency is thinking. So if you think accreditation is significant for education, and you listen to people talk about what's required for accreditation, they will say one thing, but the accreditation agency, if you ask them, will say something different. And so the schools are doing things in the name of accreditation that really have nothing to do with accreditation. And the Classical Liberal Arts Academy just proved that. What modern schools are doing has nothing to do with accreditation. And this is the corruption of modern schools. So, for example, modern Catholic schools are hiring teachers who have state teaching licenses, teaching certificates in different states. So the Catholic school is hiring teachers that have teaching licenses, a secular state authorized teaching license, which is given to a teacher who has completed a state-approved education program. And this, of course, is for public schooling. It has nothing to do with private schools at all. But if we were to ask the Catholic school, why are you giving attention or requiring public school teaching licenses in private schools? The private schools will say, well, it's for the sake of accreditation. You see, we want to show the accreditation agencies that our teachers are professional and they're qualified. And so for the accreditation, we require that our teachers have teaching licenses. Okay, if that's true, well then that's fine. But here's the problem. That's not true. Because if we go to the accreditation agency and ask, do our teachers need to have state teaching licenses? The accreditation agent will say, we have nothing to do with state licensing. That's for their own schools. That's a hiring requirement that they've established. That has nothing to do with accreditation. And so the schools are doing things, the schools have policies, the schools are restricting candidates for teaching jobs and attributing the policy to accreditation when in fact it has nothing to do with accreditation. That's the corruption of modern schools. And this is what I'd like to call attention to. If we go to the modern authorities directly, rather than listening to hearsay from all different people in these different fields, we'll find that what the actual modern agents, colleges, employers, accreditation agencies, and so on, what they actually are looking for and what they actually require is not what existing schools and teachers and administrators, even parents, say is required. And so we've got these two parallel worlds. The world of the school systems, with all of the sort of hearsay requirements that they teach the children are necessary and important, and then the actual real world and what's actually important. And in my career, I've dealt with this a number of times. For example, I was a poor kid. As an 18-year-old, my family had no money, and yet I was gifted intellectually and wanted to go to college. But because my high school education was so poor, I couldn't qualify to get into Rutgers University, which was the local university I wanted to attend. And so I found out that if I called the university and told them that I wanted to study, but I wasn't qualified because of my past to get started as an 18-year-old kid, whether there was something else that I could do, if there was some alternate route that I could take to be able to go to college. And they said, yes, of course. You don't have to seek admission with a normal freshman class. You don't have to gain admission to Rutgers College. We have an adult school here at Rutgers University called University College that's open to all adults. And so any adult who's interested in continuing his or her education can enroll in University College. And I thought to myself, why all the hubbub about college admission when anyone can just sign up for classes? And so I signed up to study at Rutgers University as a student, an adult student, in University College. And they told me that to get started, I'm only allowed to take part-time credits. So I wasn't allowed to take more than 12 credits. So I started taking a few classes each semester. And I started to get straight A's in my classes. And then once I proved that I could study responsibly, they took away that restriction, and I was able to take full-time classes at Rutgers University as a student enrolled in University College, the adult continuing education college. So all the talk of college admission and the requirements and this, it was all baloney. I signed up for college, started going to classes, was a regular college student on campus, graduated with a 3.8 GPA and was admitted to Phi Beta Kappa. And so what I want to highlight is how the messaging of the high school and the teachers and the guidance counselors and the school administrators was not true. All of that pressure and stress about getting admitted and getting your application in on time and getting your SAT score, none of that was really true. There were other means for one interested in pursuing a college education. The same thing happened in 2013 when I attempted to start my own private school here in North Carolina. I live in an area where there's no Catholic school in the entire county. And so I wanted to start a school because I had a bunch of kids. My oldest kids were still school age, and I said, I want to organize a Catholic school for them. So I purchased a property, purchased a place with a building that could be used for a small school, and got in touch with the local, the local building inspectors and the permit people, and asked if I could start a private school. And so they told me what I had to do. I had to have an engineer, provide drawings, and this, and it was thousands of dollars. And so I did that, and then we got all the feedback from the inspectors, and it was all of this. Oh, well, you got all these upgrades are needed, tens of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because the whole school building has to be brought up to code, and you've got to be qualified to serve the maximum number of students that the building can actually hold based on its size. And I was looking to have a small private school, something like an old-fashioned schoolhouse with a dozen kids. And they were telling me that because we had a pretty good-sized building, it could actually hold 100 students. And so I had to have everything fit to serve 100 students. And so at first we thought, oh, so we're not going to be able to do this. But then I said, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way that that's the law. There's no way that that could be the law. That if this building can serve 100 students, then it must serve 100 students. There's no way that could be the law. So I pressed on it. I got in touch with the inspector, and I said, come on, seriously. Is that really the law? And we talked a little bit, and then I proposed an idea. I said, what if we put up a wall that cut the building into two separate parts, and we just had the main sort of large multi-purpose room and the office, the front office, and we just effectively divided the building into two different spaces with two separate entrances? Could I just get the front part of the building approved for private school use? And the inspector said, yeah, that would work. So in a moment, we went from having this project just shut down, and that could have been the end of the discussion. But by poking and asking and clarifying, I was able to get the front multi-purpose room approved for 20 kids, and we had sufficient bathrooms, sufficient entrance and exit pathways and all that. And we got it approved, and we were able to start and run a small private school during the years when my oldest kids were home, when I felt we needed that. But that was another example of the initial message, the initial messaging being false. And as I poked and pressed and thought, I found that actually wasn't true. And the same thing happened recently with accreditation. When I started talking to people about accreditation, they just blew me off. Like, there's no way that what you're doing could possibly get accredited. There's no way. You don't have a faculty, you don't have a staff, you don't have a facility. You just don't have all the stuff that a school has. And I didn't listen to them. And instead, I got in touch with the accreditation agency and asked them. And the accreditation agents told me the exact opposite of everything that everyone else was thinking and saying, because their ideas about how things work are false. And by talking directly to the accreditation agents, I learned what was necessary, what had to be done, and then I did it and got accreditation for the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, as crazy as that may seem. Because what is actually required in 2024 is not what people say is required. And what they're doing and what they're justifying doing because of all these requirements they talk about is actually not justified, not necessary. Now, the reason why this is important is because these things that we do that aren't necessary, these restrictions we talk about that don't actually exist, are being used as excuses to avoid important things that we should be doing. Pope Pius X, when he wrote against the modernists, he warned that modern studies like mathematics and the natural sciences, they really have no limits. And so if they're not controlled, if they're not studied purposefully and limited, they can just take over the whole curriculum. And when they do that, that may sound nice to say, oh, we've got this exploding math and science program. That sounds so great. Aren't we so smart? No, because there's only so much time and energy. And when these subjects run wild, other subjects are neglected. And these subjects that get neglected are actually more important than math and science. Logic gets cut out of the curriculum. Rhetoric gets cut out of the curriculum. Religion gets cut out of the curriculum. Moral philosophy gets cut out of the curriculum. Bible study gets cut out of the curriculum. And while all these important subjects are removed, we're bragging about students getting into calculus and getting into AP physics and so on. But we're doing that at the expense of far more important subjects. And if we ask schools, why are you doing this? Why are you giving so much attention to mathematics, higher mathematics, and AP level science classes while you're neglecting catechism and Bible study and moral philosophy, logic, rhetoric, and so on? They'll say, well, you have to understand that college admission is very competitive, accreditation is very challenging, and these justifications are false. Now, when people who work in education say things that are false, there's a number of possible reasons. Number one, they're ignorant. They don't actually know what's required. The other option is that they're intentionally making this stuff up to justify what they're doing. Now, if they're ignorant, we have a problem because we've got the wrong people in the schools. We've got ignorant people running our schools and teaching our children. So even if we've got some innocent ignorance, the schools are still faulty. We've got people running the schools, running the classrooms, teaching the children that are ignorant and don't even know what's required in modern education. And I would agree that most of them are ignorant of these things. They don't even think about them. But I have a problem, though, with people who work in education who are ignorant, and again, that can be innocent, but who go around making assertions that they cannot prove to be true. I don't understand what kind of people we have working in schools who make assertions, who tell people things, and have no evidence for what they tell people. That's a different kind of problem. That's a problem where people are not even sensitive to or concerned with the truth. And there's no excuse for that kind of communication. There's no excuse for assertions, especially in education, especially in Catholic education, for which we have no evidence. And this is a common problem in modern education. So I've given 3 examples where, in my own experience, in my own education and career, I found that what people say about requirements and what is actually required are 2 different things. And that's very common today. Now, this brings us back to this issue where modern vocations should be the end of our education. When we educate children, we should know what the modern vocations are, what's required for them, truly required. What's truly required for them, and we should be directing our students to the knowledge and skills that they need to prepare for those vocations, and we should be assessing and recognizing that knowledge and those skills which are actually necessary for them to prepare for modern vocations. And this is where we get a lot of things messed up. I'll give you an example. A young boy may say, I want to grow up and be a priest. I'd like to be a priest. And so we say, well, what do you need to do to be a priest? Well, I'm going to have to go to seminary. And in order to go to seminary, I have to have a bachelor's degree. So I'm going to go to college. I'm going to study to get a bachelor's degree, and then I'm going to go to seminary. And most people would think, yeah, that's what you need to do to be a priest, right? You need to go get a college degree so that you can get admitted to seminary, because you've got to go through seminary to become a priest. But who's actually contacted the bishop's office or the seminary and asked, what needs to be done if my son would like to become a priest? Who's actually asked what's required? Because if we're wrong, we're going to take this young man who's interested in a religious vocation and send him to a college for 4 years where he may lose that vocation for many reasons, all because it was assumed that that was just what needed to be done. And it could actually turn out to be false, because that may not even be the path that the bishop would recommend or that the seminary would require. But no one asks. And even if you go on, let's say, the bishop's website or the seminary website, and they've got information on the website, just because there's sort of a plan explained or what to do explained, it doesn't mean that that's the only way. It doesn't mean that's the only way. That may be the normal way, just like applying and getting admitted into a freshman class is the normal way to go to college. But that may not be the only way, and that may not be the right way for you. And schools and parents have to search these things out and know these things. When I look at young men who want to be priests, what I think is, or what I would recommend is, rather than say, I want to be a priest and live in the secular world after I finish high school and go to college for 4 years, and then if you really want to be a priest, why wouldn't you want to join a religious community right out of high school, when those religious communities take care of the education of their members and lead them through formation for the priesthood? Why are you pretending that there's one route to the priesthood which requires this rather troublesome path through 4-year college or university when you can go straight into religious life and receive your education and priestly formation and ordination right through the community in the security of the religious community? That would seem like a more reasonable, more direct path. You begin religion now, not at some point in the future. This is what I discovered with my own kids with the military. The normal path is they say, well, you finish high school, then you apply for an ROTC scholarship. And if you get the ROTC scholarship, well, then you can go to college. And when you graduate college, you can become an officer in the military. Well, that's the normal way. But there's another way. You can have your son go to basic training as soon as he's done with his high school studies, and as soon as he finishes basic training, joining the reserves, not full active duty military service, but the reserves. Once he's finished with basic training and then goes to his occupational training, AIT, he then comes back home and he's free to do what he wants. He's just got to fulfill his reserve duty, but he can go to college and have the military pay for it. He gets tuition assistance, has a GI Bill, all this. And when he goes to college, as soon as he gets admitted to the college, he can join the ROTC program at the college. He's already in the military. He's already been through basic training. He's already getting paid as a reserve. He's already got financial assistance. And then he can join ROTC and become a cadet and become an officer when he graduates. There are other ways to do things, but the parents and the educators aren't making the effort to knock and ask about these things. They just take this sort of word on the street about what needs to be done and actually make decisions based on unverified assertions about what needs to be done. And I think that this really screws up a lot of kids, and it's how modern schools work. And we've got to explore these things. We've got to look at modern vocations and ask, what's actually required to do this? Not what do people say is required, not what does the college say, not what does the school guidance counselor say, but what do the actual people at the destination institutions, what do they actually say is necessary? And even when they give us that first answer, if we keep pushing a little bit and ask, are there any other options? Are there any other ways? Consider my son or my daughter's unique circumstances. Is there any other way that this could be done? What about if this? What about if that? We'd be surprised to find how many opportunities there are outside of the normal path. But we've got to ask. We've got to seek. We've got to take responsibility for these things and not just follow lazily and irresponsibly the word on the street, the unevidenced assertions, the hearsay. And so today we've got whole institutions built on hearsay. We've got whole institutions, schools, colleges, universities, built on this culture of myths and rumors about what's necessary for different things. Oh, well, if you want to go into business, you need to get a master's degree in business administration. Really? For what? To start a business? No one needs a master's degree to start a business. You need a skill. Are you cultivating a skill? What's the business going to be? The master's degree in business administration is not going to give you a business. What is the actual business going to be? What skill or what knowledge do you have that you're going to offer to other people that they're going to want to buy? The MBA is not going to give you a business. You can say, well, I want to go to college to study marketing because I want to learn how to reach customers and I want to learn how to. The internet gives you direct access to the market from your bedroom. This isn't 1980. You don't need to learn how to run ads in the newspapers or on television. Marketing is direct. You have access to the market, to the audience. They're on social media. Access them directly. You can go listen to an expert on this, like Gary Vaynerchuk, if you look him up on the internet. He'll explain. He's the owner of a giant marketing firm in New York City. He'll tell you how to get in touch with your audience. And he'll tell you need to make like 100 social media posts every day. You need to engage with people. You need to engage in online discussions. You need to develop relationships and network with people. You don't need to travel. You don't need to go to conferences. You don't need to go all over. This isn't 1980. You have direct access to the market right on your computer. This is digital media, digital marketing. And so what you see is that the vocations and the means have changed. And yet the paths that people are taking for these vocations are outdated. They're outdated and they're being perpetuated by these institutions like colleges and high schools for the benefit of those high schools and colleges. They're still offering the degrees, they're still offering the training and the licenses and these things that are no longer necessary. The schools are almost concealing the reality from the students for their own benefit. And that's what I call the corruption of schools. The schools do not exist for the benefit of the students. They exist like a business for the benefit of the employed, of the workers. Just as a business doesn't really exist for the profit of the customers, but for the workers. Modern schools and colleges do not exist for the benefit of the students. The students are like customers, and the schools operate for the benefit of the staff, the faculty, the administration, and so on. The schools look at what the government is willing to pay per student, and that suddenly becomes the tuition. So if the government's willing to grant $30,000 a year to a student in student loans, the school will charge whatever the maximum is that the student can obtain. And that becomes the financial plan of the school. And then the schools say, well, look, that's just what it costs. That's what costs. You're in control of the whole program. You can't say that's what it costs when you design the whole program. It's your program. The government financial aid allowances can't just mysteriously line up with what it costs. You're charging the maximum that you can obtain. Thinking about the benefit of the school and the workers rather than the students. And the students are ending up with degrees that they've been led to think are going to help them. And then when they obtain the degree, they find that the degree is not even necessary for the work that they want to do. And now they've got to go try to figure out how to actually get the knowledge and skills needed to do the work. And they've got to carry this burden of the cost of their degree, which now is found to be useless. I can give you another good example. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is a private business. You can start your own school. You can start your own educational program. You don't need a college degree to be a teacher. You need to be a good teacher. You don't need a master's degree in education to be a school headmaster. You need to be able to actually develop a curriculum and administer a school program. Getting the degree does not, in modern circles, because the schools are corrupt, getting the degree does not get you the career. In fact, like I said, you're going to find that what you need for the career to actually be successful in the real market is completely different than what you gained through the school program. And the schools just perpetuate these useless degree programs, grabbing all the money that the government makes available, communicating to the students that what they're doing is what they should be doing and what's necessary, and that there's just no other way. This is just how it all works, and it's all false. It's false. The accreditation of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is proof that it's all false. So what do we need to do to reform education? This is what I wrote about on the Academy blog. What do we need to do to reform education? And here's what I want to do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. First of all, we need to find out what modern vocations are. What are the modern vocations? What are the options that our kids have? In the Middle Ages, there were three classes of people. There were nobles, who were a governing class and who were responsible to fight and protect the people. The religious, who were responsible to pray and administer the sacraments. And then the peasant class, which was responsible to do all the work. So there were three principal paths when we talk about vocations. You were either a noble, one who governs, or you were a religious, or you were a worker. And really, if we look today, the same divisions exist. We've got government workers, whether they're politicians, soldiers, whatever it may be, those who work in government offices. Then we've got the religious, which is almost neglected completely today because of the problems caused by math and science education, that kids are not introduced to philosophy and theology and contemplative life. They don't pray during the day in school or even at home. So at 18, contemplative life, religious life's not even on the radar, but that's the second of the three vocational paths. And then the third is work. Whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a janitor, you're working. You're working for the market. Your work is controlled by the market. Three same paths. We've got to identify the vocations, not just generally, but specifically. We've got to learn what's actually required for these vocations. What's actually required? All the options have to be known. What's actually required for this individual student to do this specific thing? What's actually required? And we have to create, what's the term that I used in the article here? 1 second. Let me look this up. Sorry, I just want to find one phrase I used if I can. I can't find it. It's in the article. But basically, I said that what we need to do is we need to identify the modern vocations and their actual requirements. And then we need to create direct paths from where our students are to those vocations. And these are going to need to be new paths. Inasmuch as there are new vocations in new circumstances with new requirements, we need new direct paths for our students to prepare them for these vocations, whatever they may be. We need to learn what they are. We need to create these paths. We then need to make sure that the students have access to the knowledge and skills that they need to learn, to prepare for these vocations. We need to assess those ideas and skills. That's the duty of the school, to assess those necessary ideas and skills, and then to recognize students who obtain them. That's what schools need to do. So, when you hear parents complain or teachers complain and say, "Oh, they just teach to the test," well, that's only bad when the test has no purpose. But if we've actually got a clear path from where we are to where that vocation is, and that test sits on that path, assessing a student's learning of necessary concepts and skills, then that test is good, and teaching to the test is great. The problem is not teaching to the test. The problem is that the tests are just random. So we've got to create these learning paths that connect our students to modern vocations as they actually exist. And then we've got to assess the knowledge and skills required on that path. And we've got to recognize and award the students who are, in fact, mastering that knowledge and those skills with significant recognition that they can then bring to those future vocations. And those recognitions will be meaningful. Because much of what the kids are doing today is not a part of any such path. It's not connected to any future vocation, any real future vocation. And the awards that they're winning in school, the diplomas they're getting, the certificates they're getting, the tests they're taking, they're irrelevant. And this is what I mean by the corruption of schools. So the reform of schools, the reform of education, which may not even require schools, that's another big part of this question. The reform of education begins with learning about the vocations and their actual requirements today and all the options that are available, because some options may be better for us than others. And the normal options, printed in the policy manual or published on the website, the normal requirements or the normal methods may not be the only methods, and they may not be the best methods. We need to learn that for our children's sake. Then we need to create the path, as I said, from where the kids are to where they need to get, and then we need to make sure that everything we do is aligned with that path. The knowledge they gain, the skills they gain are purposeful. The assessments, the assignments, the quizzes that they take are purposeful and meaningful because they're on that path. And the recognitions that they're given, the awards they're given, are meaningful. They benefit them in those future vocations. If you look at the image on the top of that article, what you see is all of the existing institutions around the perimeter of the image with red arrows connecting them, and you see this long, indirect process to modern vocations. And you see that that path really has nothing to do with those modern vocations. It's just perpetuated and perpetuated and perpetuated for the benefit of the schools and the colleges and the institutions. But then you'll see the green arrow going straight from the student to the vocation. That's the line or the path of preparation. That's where educational reform takes place. That's the challenge that we face to improve education. We can't simply continue going through this outdated and corrupt cycle of education that doesn't actually prepare the students for the vocations. We have to stop going through that cycle for no reason, especially because it's very expensive, not just in money, but in time. We've got to stop going through that cycle and ask, what is the most efficient? That's the key word in education. What is the most efficient path to prepare my students, my children, myself? What's the most efficient path to prepare me for my future vocation? Because we can't afford to do anything else. We can't afford to go through this mindless, hearsay, old-fashioned, obsolete path to a career that's not necessary in 2024. And this is what modern schools do. Most students, parents, teachers, administrators cannot explain why kids need to be in school. Most parents use schools as a daycare service. The consequences of that are very significant. That's not what schooling is for. Schooling is not for daycare. The paths are unsustainable, they're too expensive, and they put kids at such a disadvantage by the time they enter into their vocation, if they ever even get there, that they can't compete. And this is the problem with the corruption of modern education. And so to reform it, as I said, and I'll wrap up here, to reform education, we've got to identify modern vocations as they are today. We've got to learn from those vocations themselves what the requirements actually are. And then we've got to create paths from where our students are to those vocations. We need to make sure we provide our kids with the knowledge and skills necessary for those actual requirements. We need to assess those ideas and skills and not just have busy work and all kinds of nonsense, unnecessary subjects and courses and activities. We don't need field trips and skits and all kinds of school nonsense. We need to prepare kids for their vocations. We need to figure out what the knowledge is, what the skills are, assess that knowledge and those skills, reward and recognize that knowledge and those skills, and then send those kids off well prepared for their vocations. That's what's needed in the reform of education. Now, at the bottom of that article, I explained that the people in control of this process are the consumers, that is, the parents and the students. They determine whether this reform takes place or not because they control the whole thing. Parents choose to just get in line with all the other sheep and go through the normal process that everyone knows doesn't work well. They can do that. It's very easy, very convenient. You can just get in line and go through the normal route in this long, circuitous path that does no good. And then you can spend your whole life complaining about the costs of education, how expensive it is to have kids, how it's better to use birth control because you can't afford to raise kids nowadays, and just be a part of that whole culture. It's just an irresponsible, self-seeking culture. Or you can say, look, I understand what the problem is. I see what I need to do, and I'm going to do it. The reform of education is entirely up to the consumers, to the parents and the students. They control the whole thing. If they refuse to participate in these ineffective paths, those paths will die. And if they say, I want facts and evidence, I want you to explain to me what the vocation is, what the path is to that vocation, how everything my son does is leading him to that vocation, and no nonsense. They have the right to demand that. And if they do demand it, education will be reformed, and this nonsense will be eliminated, and it can be done in a single generation. So we're getting long here. I want to cut this off, but I recommend you read through that article I posted. It's titled The Corruption of Education and Its Reform, and I'd love to know your thoughts because I'm sure you've experienced this. I know that I'm not unique with respect to all of this, but that's what needs to be done for the reform of education, and it can be done because the consumers control the whole thing. I hope that's helpful. God bless.